I'd like to invite all of our panelists to the stage. We'll begin our discussion. Let me just say really briefly, we do have a Twitter hashtag for this event, so if you're going to be live tweeting or you have a question that you're too shy to ask for some reason, you can use this hashtag. It's hashtag Women in Leadership, and you can get involved in the debate on social media and keep it going perhaps after we leave. So panelists, welcome to the stage. While we're waiting for them to take their seats, let me get a show of hands. How many of you are students at this moment? Okay, majority of the audience. How many of you are in the first 5 years of your career? Okay, and how many of you have been working for more than 5 years in a professional capacity? Okay, all right, so a good mix, but a lot of students. That's encouraging because there's a lot of potential to shape the future here. So we've been talking about the challenges, but also the successes of women in international affairs. And Madam Ambassador, you are certainly a success story. You've made it to the top of your career. Tell us a little bit about your personal experience. How did you get where you are right now?
Well, like I said, I joined in 1980, so it has been a progression over the many years. I had studied international relations. I started with journalism in Quebec City, then I went to France, I studied international relations. So I think that helped. When I joined the Foreign Service, I had already the experience of living abroad. I knew what to expect. It was not the case for all of the other women who joined. I said we were a small group, and after a few months, 2 had left already. I think they realized it was not for them. So I think I had the benefit of the 4 years that I had already spent abroad. And then, you know, I was single. I had an open mind, willing to go to many different places. And so I think because of the diversity of experiences that I had, I was offered interesting jobs. But I got married eventually to someone who was also in the Foreign Service, and that was a challenge. But I must say that the Department of Foreign Affairs in Canada was very good, even, you know, in the 90s, very good at trying to figure out a way for us to be posted together in the same city. It was not obvious, and I know that for many countries, the solution is to put, you know, one officer in one capital, the other in a different country. And I think that that's very difficult to manage, especially if you have children. So my husband and I, we always worked as a team. When we took an assignment abroad, it was because it worked for the family. So I always felt I was very supported from that point of view. And I think women have a tendency not to put themselves forward as much as men. But I must say that my husband was the one who was pushing me, saying, you know, you're doing well, so why don't you ask for this? And I said, no, you know, I don't think I'm ready. Go and ask for it. But if you don't have that, I think women have a tendency, at least women of my generation, we had the tendency to wait until somebody would come and say, would you consider? And I think that now women are probably more alert to the fact that you have also to open the way for yourself and not be shy. And it's not because you've never done something before that you cannot do it. And when you try, and I think I was at the right place at the right time also. And I ended up in Berlin. And I think that's a great, fantastic assignment to have at the end of my career.
Well, we're very pleased to have you here. Mr. Nunn, you were the ambassador to Pakistan for Germany. Was this also something that you witnessed, this idea that women were less likely to put themselves forward to say, hey, here I am, let me do it?
Well, Pakistan is naturally such a different place than the countries we are talking about, Canada, Germany, and others. Therefore, if we're talking about Pakistan, we are talking about completely different rules of engagement and a complete different position of women in the society, which is not due to actually what you achieve, but it's to where you were born.
But what about at the embassy, with your embassy staff? Was it a theme there?
Well, you know, these postings are on a voluntary base still in our system, meaning nobody goes to a posting like that if you don't want to go there. So half of the staff were female colleagues, and they were there on a voluntary base for one reason or the other. So there was no stress about that. If you have worked abroad in countries far away, you know that you recreate in a way also your little cosmos, you know, and this little cosmos is very happy with itself, and the art is naturally to have bridges to the society you work in and you work also for, and for the relations. So that was not a problem, if that's the question.
That's good, because it was last year, so that means perhaps some progress has been made. What about you, Ms. O'Donovan? You worked in the UN for a lot of your career, and you spoke in your address about 4 issues that you would like to recommend the new Secretary General take on. You spoke a lot about women, but during your time there, did you seem a sense that women were less likely to put themselves forward individually? Was that your experience?
No, I don't. That wasn't my experience. In fact, what I saw really was a level of frustration amongst many women, particularly at the middle management level, who felt that they had the experience, they had done their field service, because the International Labour Organization is a field-based organization with offices in 57 offices around the world, so headquarters in Geneva. But here were women who had served in field offices, but who felt that they were not necessarily considered fairly considered for promotion. As I said in my short presentation, it gets very narrow, the promotional journey at a certain level, and the opportunities are very limited. But I must say that I have seen, certainly at the ILO, I saw an opening up for women, particularly with our previous Director General, Juan Samavia, who was very committed to ensuring that women were given at least equal opportunity within the organisation. But you always had this, particularly heads of offices, appointing women as directors of offices in difficult countries, difficult duty stations. But I think throughout the UN, you will meet women on the ground as heads of offices. So I don't see that the reluctance of women is an issue. I still think the lack of opportunity and seeing women as being appointable to certain positions is still an issue. There's a strong culture, male-dominated culture, still at the top.
Mm. You're saying,
Sarah, can I jump in?
please.
If this is working. I think one of the examples that flows on really well, and you mentioned or indicated it in your speech, Patricia, is the recent election of the UN Secretary General. And as many in this room know, we have a new Secretary General, Antonio Guterres. However, we had a very strong campaign to have a female candidate. There was the She for UN Secretary General campaign, pushing specifically to have a woman. And in fact, we did have a number of very strong candidates with the same experience. Helen Clark, with also, like Antonio Guterres, experience being Prime Minister of a country and the head of a UN entity, UN Development Program. We also had Cristina Figueres, who many of you may recall in her role in Paris, leading the UNFCCC negotiations, and widely seen as a very, very successful leader at bringing states together. There was also an Argentinian foreign minister. There were Irina Bokova, a Bulgarian, who is head of UNESCO, and the list goes on. There are a number of very capable female candidates, and one of the questions that's been asked is, yes, we have seen a more transparent process, but why is it that we weren't able to get a woman head of the UN at this point in time, given the goodwill, as you've pointed out? And obviously this is a question that needs to be levelled not at the UN, but at states themselves, because ultimately it's states who are making that decision.
It's an interesting point, Mr. Nunn.
I think we monitored that naturally very closely in the foreign ministry, and at the end, I think one has to be very honest. There is a discrepancy between what we proclaim to be very important and what we believe to be very important, a woman from the Eastern European group, and then the realities of power politics as they play a huge role in the United Nations, as also in other bodies. And at the end, you know the results, you know who has been vetoed by whom, and they have not been vetoed because they were women or because they were men, Mrs. Klaas and Mrs. Bukova, for instance, but because they represented a policy, a region, a past, which was not suitable to the interest of some of the P5 mainly. And therefore, I would not say a man has been voted in and a woman have not been voted in, but the candidate chosen is the candidate who, for many, many reasons, suited at the end everybody. And it's a pity, that is also how the German government feels, that it was not a woman, and it's also a pity we feel that it was not a woman from Eastern Europe.
I want to move on a little bit from the UN and talk about why institutions should be motivated to get women into leadership roles, what benefit it has for the institution. And as a woman who made it into a high-ranking leadership role with the ILO, what do you think?
Well, I mean, there's quite a lot of research about this in terms of what women bring to organisations, both public and private. Mr. Nunn mentioned it as well, the diversity, the different perspective, different skill set that I think, I hesitate to generalise, but you can make some generalisations that women bring certain skill sets and they're stronger in certain areas than men. But I think the main argument, and I would bring it both from the UN but also from my work in the trade union world, and that is that your credibility as an organisation, as a representative organisation which purports to speak on behalf of people on certain issues, if you don't have a representative face in terms of gender, but also in terms of ethnic diversity and so on, your credibility is really at stake. And I think this is the real issue for particularly organisations which are engaged in advocacy, whether it's at the international level or whether it's at the national level. And reflecting a little bit on the Security Council, it was something that struck me. I don't know if any of you saw the coverage of the debate, I think it was over a week ago, on the resolution on Syria promoted by France and Spain, I think, at the UN Security Council. And there was, just a panning of the meeting by the television cameras. There was not a single woman. Usually the US ambassador, but at least in the shot that came up, not a single woman sitting around this table debating this issue. And I thought to myself, for the public, because this is the face of the UN that the public generally knows, the UN Security Council, this is the only time really that the UN appears, or as it's a crisis on the ground. And I just thought, it really isn't working. I'm not, would it have changed the substance of the debate, the discussion? I don't know. But in terms of its representation and its global role, this is not working, and it won't work. So for me, it is more about the credibility and the legitimacy of an organisation and an entity which particularly purports to represent the interests of people.
You raise a really interesting point. Would it have changed the substance of the debate? You have 36 years experience watching different debates with women, without them.
Absolutely. It changes the nature of the debate. I mentioned that our current government has decided to mainstream gender issues across the board. And I'll give the specific example of our development policy. And the main focus is to be on women and girls. And I think this is going to be quite interesting. Like I said, we've always paid attention to the gender issue, but now it becomes the top priority. And it's very difficult to do that if you don't have women at the right places, frankly, to think in those terms. How is it that you can support women, make sure that they are full participants, not only in developmental issues, but in stabilization issues, in peace discussions and so forth. If they're not at the table, it's not going to happen. And for a country like Canada that is trying to play a positive role like Germany on the international scene, we are party to all kinds of discussions. I think the fact that we are now promoting this across the board is likely to make a difference. So when we speak about the promotion of women, it's not only within the foreign ministry, it's also outside. And when it comes, if I may say a word on the type of leadership of women, I think that it has been said that it's more collegial, it's more open. I would say it's also probably less hierarchical than it would be with men. And I had a fantastic example of that. I had the opportunity to work with Madeleine Albright, and she was chairing a group of experts working on a new strategic concept for NATO a few years ago, and I was one of the 12 experts working with her. And I happened to be the only other woman. So there was Madeleine Albright, 10 men, and myself. And it was, I was not a NATO expert. I had been brought into the group for other reasons. You know, I had all kinds of other experiences. But Madeleine Albright, I thought, did something that was quite extraordinary. Within a meeting or two, we were able to work as a team. And there were people who had pretty big egos around the table, coming from, you know, they had been previous defense minister, previous foreign ministers. And within a few hours, you know, we were working as a team. And she said, I don't want to hear anyone saying Madam Ambassador, Madam Minister, or Mr. Minister. And I think that it was a very good example of what women can do. I'm not saying men cannot do it, but I think it's typical of the way women would approach these things.
Let me raise another question. Is there a need for a feminist foreign policy? And whoever would like to jump in on that can. Something that prioritizes different negotiation styles, but also a workplace culture balancing family life, home life with work. Is there a need for feminist foreign policy? Nina, I see you pondering.
I can start out. And I think this question partly came, some of you may be familiar with Sweden currently has a female foreign minister who's made this part of her platform, a feminist foreign policy. And I think what's been really interesting and ambitious about this is exactly this point. It's not just about having more women involved in our own institutions, whether it be the UN or a foreign ministry, but also about supporting gender equality through many different forms. And so I think it's a very interesting and important element of, I would argue, international affairs. Things like UN Security Council Resolution 1325 in 2001 was, I would argue, a part of a feminist foreign policy. It was a resolution to include more women in peace and security. I did research in East Timor shortly after it, and I was looking at the role of the women's movement in East Timor. And what was really interesting is seeing how women in East Timor were picking it up to make their own claims about their importance of being included in post-conflict negotiations. So in Timor, you had an occupation by Indonesia for many years. The UN ran the state, and then women said, we want to be included in the peace negotiations and in the parliament. And Security Resolution 1325, which I would argue is part of a feminist foreign policy, gives many women a platform to attach those sorts of claims. And in that case, there's some wonderful success stories. In Timor, they actually got over 25% of their parliament was made up of women, which was a higher number than Australia. And there's also an interesting side note there in the story. They wanted quotas, which we haven't actually talked about yet, but the UN Department of Political Affairs ruled out quotas, said they couldn't have them because only socialist countries had quotas. So East Timor actually, in the end, even though many UN officials did support it and many men supported it, they had to look for other ways to include women in parliament. So my answer would be yes. I think that a feminist foreign policy is very important, not just for increasing women's representation, but also for increasing women and gender equality more broadly.
Yes, please, Mr. Nunn.
What my experience is in the last, 10, 15 years is that the students who qualify to enter the diplomatic service in the German case, which is a very tough selection. It's 3,000 candidates, 25 are taken. Very, very tough. The ladies and the gentlemen are, if you want so, more and more alike, which was not the case when I entered.
In what way alike?
Alike, I will tell you, they have the same educational background. They are all citizens of the world in a way which even myself was not at all. They have been all in the same universities, mostly good universities. Many of them speak faraway foreign languages, so their level of qualification is extraordinarily high. The ladies, the gentlemen, all of them extraordinarily high. Therefore, I think it's probably easier now to recruit in this pool. You probably could take also 100% of women. I don't think there would be a problem because they are very, very qualified. And therefore now if we have 50-50, it's just reflecting the wide qualification of all these young people. And that leads to the fact, and I see that also with the colleagues, young colleagues, male and female I'm working with, leads to an attitude towards work which is also different than than before. It leads to in a certain way, a more professional attitude, you know, very much concentrated, and it leads also to a request from private life, which is also different, meaning not asking for something, but legally taking it, you know, for instance, leaves after having kids, which in the case of our ministry, as many men are taking as women. So I would say, comparing with 25 years ago when I entered the service, that there's a big change, and that is why I am quite optimistic that in 10, 15 years of time there will be parity, and we see that the parity in the high quality jobs is already there because it's growing into that. Which does not mean, as I said, that you don't need again and again a little push from a little political help. We still are in this phase. But my guess is that when I'm long pensioned and my kids will rule, that it will be different, speaking about this country and speaking about the foreign ministry. That's the little world I think, try to evaluate.
Can I jump in to say that I really like your idea of having target dates to achieve a certain level? Because if you don't do that, I think people say, yes, we're trying, but it's difficult and we don't find the right candidates. In our foreign ministry now, the goal is to have parity, as many, 50% women as head of mission by 2018. 2 years.
That's ambitious.
It focuses the mind.
Yeah. So, would you consider that then? Should it be the goal for every country, 2018, or is that unique to Canada?
Well, I think for us it's ambitious, but it is realistic and it is achievable. It depends where you are at this point. You know, if you have 10% of women in your foreign ministry and you see, well, you have to be 50% in 2018, you'll have a problem.
It might be good for some of you in this room looking for jobs next year. It sounds like a quota, and we've kind of been dancing around the issues of quotas all night. You mentioned, you know, there's a political push, sometimes it helps. Are quotas necessary? What have you seen? Canada is clearly, it's an informal quota, but it is a quota of sorts to say parity. What do you think a quota is necessary, Ms. O'Donovan?
I don't know if you can say it's necessary, but I think if you really want to achieve change, it is necessary. In fact, I'm a big believer in quotas because I've seen them work. In fact, I'm going back to my trade union experience. where we had what we called a positive action program for women, because of course when I started there in the 80s and the 90s, there were very few women in the leadership of the trade union world. Even though over a third of the membership of trade unions were women, and the areas for growth were where women were working, in the services sector and so on. And again, this discussion, well, can we really say we represent women workers when nobody at the top? There's no woman sitting at the top table. And in fact, we instituted what we called a positive action program, and part of that was a decision to reserve seats for women on the executive council of the National Trade Union Organisation, which is the one I worked for. Let's say the equivalent of the DGB here in Germany. And it was very controversial because, you know, you have all the token women, and women need to get there on their merits and all the rest of it. But it required a rules change and so on. But it was accepted. And in fact, I could, you know, I've left the trade union world for some time, but since then I've seen women, there's a woman general secretary of the organisation, there have been women presidents, women are elected to ordinary seats, not just to the reserve seats. It worked. And in parliamentary terms, I mean, we've seen it in the Nordic countries. There are many examples, and I believe it's not a principle, it's a strategy. You want to get to a certain point, how do you get? This is one very effective way of getting there. To me, it's as simple as that.
Anyone else want to weigh in on quotas? Silence. It's a controversial issue. Not everyone wants to touch it. I think at this point we should open the floor to our audience for questions, because I promise, oh, there's the first hand. I love it. Yes, stand up.
I just wanted to say I really liked what the ambassador, the Canadian ambassador, just said about how her husband supported her and encouraged her. And I wondered, so we are talking about how we should, you know, set up the quota and everything, but I wonder, shouldn't we also change the mandate of the men? Shouldn't we also think about how could men be supported to support us? How could they actually get like new chances, that they could stay at home and take care of the baby for a couple of months or something like that? Like, how do you think about it, especially the men on the panel? Like, how do you think about it? Would you have rather prefer to stay at home with your children more? Or was it just natural that your woman stays at home and gets out of her position?
Well, my children today wouldn't like to see me home for sure, but no, there has been a big change, and 25 years ago, as I told you, it was very difficult to have, and the ambassador told that we were also working in different cities, different organizations, very difficult. Now you have a legal framework. I'm speaking about the foreign ministry in Germany. You have a legal framework, and you can apply for a parent's leave as father, as mother, for a time which is up to 3 years, if I'm not wrong, up to 3 years. The first 9 months are paid, and after that it's not paid anymore. And I was, I think, telling you that in my section there are many male colleagues, I would say all male colleagues who become father, and I'm not asking if what their wife is doing, I have no idea, but they as father have the right and take this leave. So this is something which slowly but surely, and I would say Germany for that is rather a laggard, is not a country which was at the forefront of decisions, it was not. But surely and slowly it's taking ground. So my answer would be, if that is what you were asking for, things are changing, and you can better indeed adapt reconcile these two elements of family and work now, because it's possible, and it's not at the price of your career. That's also a big difference than before for the people working now. I'm not speaking 20 years ago, but for people working now, boys and girls, it is not at the price of your career, which it was the case 10 years ago, 15 and 20 years ago, where you could also, in a way or another, but then you were out, and it was you paid for that career-wise.
Can I just
Yeah, let Nita jump in, then we'll take another question from the
Just
audience.
briefly, I think one of the other things to note in response to that is about how institutions support both partners working. And I think that's really important. And one thing we were talking about before we came in was there are some very innovative foreign ministries that are now appointing husband and wife to job share, which is obviously hugely challenging. But some people, if they are working in a foreign service, it's very difficult for them to find posts like we were hearing in the same city. So, and if they're at a very senior level, it's going to be almost impossible. So there are some places, I think you were mentioning, was it France, who have...
French couple of ambassadors.
Yeah, a French couple who are job sharing the ambassadorial role. So there's some interesting innovations that are happening. Just wanting to let people know about that.
Okay, in the gray jacket right there.
Hi, I'm Judy Perkins, a MIA student here at Hertie. So I have a question for Ms. O'Donnell and anyone else who would like to pitch in. You mentioned that the numbers are stuck to between 20 and 32% for women. Do you think that age plays a factor or a role in that? The ambassador for Canada actually stated that she was young, she was single, she was able to do all this traveling, and then you were able to move up through the ranks. But a lot of people who are now entering the services are between 25 to 35 to 45 years old. Do you think that age is a variable in that?
Well, again, I don't really have hard data to rely on, but just my observation would be that for the categories that I'm talking about, the top kind of 4 senior grades, basically people would be usually well into their 40s, maybe late 40s, early 50s before they would be appointed to these positions. So the career structure, particularly for a career, an international civil servant who's a career official, they will come in at maybe a P2, which is the very young, recruitment grade into the system. It goes up P3, P4, P5, P6. So not all organizations have P6, but so basically the age group where women may be having children, may need time out, maternity leave, fathers, parental leave, and so on. Usually you're past that by the time you can be, you're considered to have the level of experience needed to be appointed to these grades. Very often, by the way, people are appointed from outside to these positions, not necessarily career. They're not necessarily career civil servants. In fact, when I was appointed to the ILO, I came from outside because I came from a trade union organization. I hadn't been an international career civil servant. But I don't think age is an issue, other than that both men and women basically tend to be at the same age group when they are appointed to these positions. It's very often, if I may say, with a small p, it's very political throughout the UN system. There are certain representation based on nationalities, for example, and heads of these organizations come under a lot of pressure from governments to appoint nationals at these senior levels. So it reflects back in on the national, what are the priorities at national level? Will they propose a man or a woman for a senior post that may be available to that particular nationality? So there are a lot of factors which come into play, but I would say that the real challenge is the space is small and the men aren't moving, and it's very hard to get them out of there. So either you have to create a bit more space, and that's why I think, let's say, mentoring programs, opportunities for foreign ministries to place people in institutions, give them the experience, give women the opportunity, and you have to be creative in this sense. But finally, I get back to my fundamental point, and that is the credibility of the institution, its role as a global organization, it has to look like the people of the world that it purports to speak on behalf of.
Okay. Let's hear from a gentleman. We haven't had a man yet.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody on the panel and everybody in the audience. I'm Shubhadeep. Until recently, I was heading an NGO in India, working on women empowerment at the grassroots level. To share my question, I will share a small story for which I'll introduce my wife here, Pooja, who is here on a German Chancellor Fellowship. And something very interesting happened between us right before our marriage. We got married recently in May 2016. In April, she got selected, and I was expecting her to give me the news in being very excited. But she came crying and howling to me that I've got selected, what am I going to do now? I was very puzzled that why is she crying? But that was because she expected, as a typical Indian man, now she would have to let go of this opportunity. But that fortunately did not happen. So, yes, thankfully, I gave up my job. I told her that everything is going to be fine. We'll take it in our stride. You have a great opportunity, so let's go ahead. So the question that I have in my mind is that we are talking about affirmative action. We are talking about quotas. We are talking about fixing targets. But I think when we are looking at success stories, it's more about peeping into our individual selves. And looking at the representation of men in this hall itself, I feel that we need to attack the mindset of our society as a whole. And my question to all of the panelists over here is, what do you think that as a society we can do apart from legislations, targets, affirmative action, in terms of changing this mindset that we have? Whether we talk about giving grants and benefits for men to support the women, or women getting benefits to be supported likewise. I mean, it does not make the difference. We're talking about equality. So I should not hesitate when it comes to supporting my wife, or my wife should not hesitate when it comes to supporting me. So if any thoughts or reflections on that, I'll be grateful. Thank you.
May I?
Please.
I think if you have children, or when you will have children, you will give a great example and you will start changing the mindset. I think that now more and more couples are put in your situation, and it's very important to show that it can be done, that it can work. And when you have children, they see that for a fact that it can work. And I would say that's certainly one way to change the mentalities. But well done. And I'm sure that you will enjoy your time in Berlin, and that it will be enriching for you as well. So,
just to add on that, yeah, well done, and it's great to hear your story. I think that's, for me, part of the reason I wanted to host this event is to exactly have these sorts of conversations. So a big part is having the conversations about us all reflecting. And I think it's important to have them as groups of women and men, as groups of men as well. And I would look maybe to one of the people we cited in the advert for this was Anne-Marie Slaughter, who was the first woman head of policy and planning in the US State Department. So it's one of the most senior positions. And she mentions, she had to have the support of her partner. Similar to you, she was lucky. He was an academic, so he had more flexibility in his work. But he's also written about his experience of being a partner, supporting a woman who was in an incredibly challenging role. So I think it's important not just to hear the women's stories, but also the men's as well. And so thank you for sharing that. It's really great to hear.
Yes, I'm overwhelmed. Okay, blue shirt.
Hi there, my name's Emma. I'm a Canadian MPP student here at Hertie, and first of all, thank you for your service. My question is about women in leadership roles currently. At the moment, and hopefully by November 8th, will have 3 women who are part of the G7 as the leaders of their country: Angela Merkel, Hillary Clinton, and Theresa May in Britain. And I'm wondering if the panel could comment on what effect this might have, the fact that we have 3 women from such economic powerhouses in these leading roles. Like I said, fingers crossed for November 8th.
Who wants to kick that one off?
Well, maybe I can just say that I think, and I'm repeating myself a little bit, but my main theme is that seeing is believing. It's quite important. And how do you change mindsets? I think you change them by visibility and having women in roles where people can see, well, yes, they can be the leader of one of the most powerful countries in the world, the German Chancellor. If Hillary Clinton is elected, also Theresa May. I mean, these are. I think by seeing, by hearing, by observing, particularly young people, it becomes, well, it's normal, it's natural that they should be in these positions. Why not? Clearly they can do the job, they know what they're doing, they're there, they're present and so on. So for me, I think it is significant. And of course, we've had powerful women leaders in the past, India being an example, which... Thatcher. And Thatcher, of course. It doesn't mean that they're all going to have a particular agenda, a socially liberal agenda, a feminist agenda. The women come with many different views right across the spectrum and are entitled to have many different views right across the spectrum. But I think it is significant, and in fact, because it's to the side of our agenda. But having said that, I think some of the campaign, not just in the United States, but also when the Conservative leader position was being challenged in Britain, there's a certain dimension to these campaigns when women are running for leadership positions, which I think also brings out a kind of a distrust of women as leaders, actually. And you know, the fact that, you know, the main statement about Hillary Clinton, she's not liked, or she's not trusted, I don't think it's unrelated to the fact that she happens to be a woman as well.
We're nearly out of time. I want to conclude the discussion by giving each of our panelists an opportunity to offer a bit of advice. I saw, based on the hands that were raised earlier, many of you in this room are either students or in the first 5 years of your career. You have a long road ahead of you. So a bit of advice, perhaps, from each panelist to our audience, what they could consider going forward. Perhaps, Mr. Nunn, you would like to start?
Well, my advice would be to really go your way. I mean, if you want to go your way, it's a lot of work for men, for women, but that's worth it. Go to what you want to aim, and I wish you, because that's the form of balance and of happiness I found, as our Indian colleagues here, to find a balance also in your private life, which I think in the profession which is mine is extraordinarily important to be good in your job and to be happy.
Mr. Donovan?
My advice would be similar, and also to say that I think this is a moment in time when the value added that women bring to the world in general, but the world of work in particular, is, I think, being recognised, and opportunities, more and more opportunities, I think, will open up. So I would be optimistic, I think, and I think you should be optimistic also. But determination is important, and to paraphrase, I would say, rather than lean in, I would say jump in is the way to go. Thank you.
Find your way, find a balance, jump in.
I agree with all of that. I think the balance thing is absolutely key. I might add, like somebody else said, find the right partner.
There's some themes emerging this evening. Nina?
And I'll add, find the right friends. I think a really strong network, particularly for young women, a network of other women who are wanting to, be ambitious in their professional lives. And there are going to be challenges. There are going to be times when you don't know how to juggle things. I'm obviously not nearly as experienced as everyone else in the panel, but I've found certainly that it's been really helpful for me to have a network of young women who I also talk with regularly, who may be based at other universities or in other professional roles, and that's immensely useful.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank all of our panelists for being with us this evening, for taking the time out of your schedule to be with us. Thank you for your words of advice. Thanks to all of you for being here. There's going to be a reception directly after, and we'd like to thank the Canadian Embassy for providing the wine. So thanks to all of you.